Thrilled to have the opportunity to celebrate Rich Davey and the fact that Rich is joining us as New York City Transit president. As I've said before, I wanted somebody who could step into this job and really make a difference from day one, and Rich has the experience to do that. He's run a major transit system, and among other things, he's dealt with the issues of how to deal, of an industry and a system that has financial challenges and that is out there trying to win riders back. That's what we're about today. Part of our conversation as we were getting ready to come out here was that I relayed to Rich that I had that I spoke to the police commissioner today about what I think is some evidence that the safety plan that the mayor has set in motion with the support of the governor is starting to make a difference. Both of us saw cops on platforms. I saw it on 3 separate platforms this morning. And on the overnight, there were a couple of different incidents that really brought home that having cops on the platforms and on the trains is making a difference. In 2 occasions, cops and MTA personnel on trains led to the recovery of illegal weapons. In one case, a loaded firearm. In another case, a fake gun that was obviously meant to give the impression that it was a loaded firearm. And in a couple other cases that we heard about fare evasion, when cops were present in stations, in a couple of cases, it was 125th and Lex, which has had some challenges. Cops stepping in to deal with fare evaders have led to people being turned away and, more important, identified as having weapons or otherwise handling crimes. And I, just by happenstance, a neighbor of mine in Brooklyn sent around a Facebook post last night which showed a situation where there was what we call an EDP, an emotionally disturbed person who was acting out in a crazy way on a train, scaring people, and then he displayed a knife. And right there in the station as it pulled in, cops were on the platform and they were able to intervene. So we got a long way to go. We're determined to make sure that our riders feel safe and are safe in the system. But I just want to say, as I shared with the police commissioner today, I think that having cops on the platforms and on the trains and very much present in the system is starting to make a difference, in addition to the homeless outreach process that's been set in motion. So that's what I think is some good news that sets the stage for the changes that Rich is going to implement. So let me turn it over to Rich. Welcome.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it. Good afternoon. Thanks for all being here. Just a couple of comments, and I think we'll probably take questions. But first, I'm super excited to be returning to New York. I think folks may have seen that I was a New Yorker from 1999 to 2002 during 9/11. I was a daily user of the system. I know a lot has changed in 20 years, some for the good, some for the not, which we'll talk about. But just really excited to be part of this team to make some change. I think on day one, my job day one is really in 3 places. It's going to be safety and security, bringing riders back. It's going to be focused on reliability and cleanliness. I think the basics are what we can control with both within transit and our partners at the city and state. To win riders back, we'll obviously have some medium-term goals as well. But those are our job one. And I would just finally say I've had a chance in the last couple of days. I've been in the city to be out in the system, to meet operators, bus operators, subway operators, and there are 52 or 50,000 employees out there who are super dedicated. So I can't be more proud to be joining this team, and I've told a few of them I hope I do them proud.
Tim?
Questioning starts today with Andrew Siff of WNBC.
Thank you very much for the honor, Mr. Mint. Appreciate it. So since Mr. Lieber brought it up, the topic of public safety, what is your impression of how much of the rider anxiety and fear right now is legitimately based on safety, and how much of it is a perception, and how will you convince people to use this system if they don't feel safe?
Sure. Well, perception is reality, right? And so I think that we collectively, and I mean we both in this building and outside this building, are doing more and need to do more, as the chairman said. Again, I mean, on my ride this morning, I took the one down here. I saw 2 officers get on the train for a few stops, get off it. I forget where actually, but got off. So appreciate what NYPD is doing for sure. But look, I mean, in many respects, subway systems here and around the world are the public square. So whatever's happening out in the public, spills into our subway system. That's what's happening now, whether it's crime, homelessness, addiction. And so we need to bring those issues to light and help those folks where they need help and prosecute those folks when they're doing bad things.
All right, let's move on to Zoom, please. Reminder, the reporters on Zoom, raise your hand electronically if you have a question. First up is Marcia Kramer, WCBS 2. Marcia, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tim. Can you hear me?
We do.
So, Mr. Davey, I know that you've had some time to study the system, and I'm wondering. I know that you say that bringing riders back is your number one goal, but I wonder if I were to say to you, what are the top 3 things that you see need to be fixed in the system, and how do you plan to fix them? What would you say?
Yeah, I think a few things. I mean, just even in the last few days, right? So obviously safety is absolutely the top priority, and the security of our system. I think that's job 1. I think 2, where we control is reliability, right? So whether it's signal or switch problems, perhaps communicating better with our customers. I know just yesterday we had, I think, 3 customers who were ill, which caused significant delays. Not something we can necessarily control, but I'd want to know and make sure we're communicating with our customers that are out there in the system to know that that's true. And then, as I mentioned, cleanliness. Obviously, COVID has really focused cleanliness here and in other systems across the world, but certainly making sure our system is clean as well. I think those are the 3, day 1 priorities we need to focus on. There'll be others supporting the Capitol team and what they're doing, building back our people. We've lost thousands of folks here in the system. We're still down several thousand, so to make sure that when riders do come back, potentially to pre-pandemic levels at some point, that we're prepared to move the 8 million New Yorkers that were here, using our system a little over 2 years ago.
All right, just to your left, sir, it's Clayton Gusa of the Daily News. He's right there.
Hi, I got 2 questions. One's broad. You're not the first person to come to the MTA from another city's transit agency with the hope or promise to fix our rotten transportation system. Not everyone succeeds. There's 2 people in Canada right now that could probably tell you that. What makes you different broadly? And then I have a specific question.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the folks who have come before, but a couple things. I think one is, as I mentioned, I do have had some history here in New York, being a New Yorker in the past. I think 2, my experience in the private sector in the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to both advise and learn from other systems globally. I can't speak to what those specifics are because they're our clients, but I think it's fair to say I hope to import some best practices from other systems. And lastly, look, I also think, too, I'm fortunate to be coming into a situation where the team here, the transit team, is very good. They've got an excellent reputation in the industry, and so building upon that. So I hope to both learn, but also import some best practices.
And I just wanted to ask specifically about the incident yesterday. You were here, or at least in town. I know you're not working at transit yet, but there were 3 sick customers, but there was also a train that got stuck on a little-used switch that caused big problems for riders all day. What best practices in terms of state of good repair work are you bringing here? And did anyone give you an explanation as to what went wrong with that switch when the last time it was inspected or maintained?
Yeah, I mean, so on the best practices point, a few things. I think one is, just really digging into the facts of why that occurred. I mean, I think is obviously critical. So post-incident, issues, need to dig in and understand why. Was it a switch issue, or was that actually a secondary cause? Maybe it was a power failure. I don't know, but those, I think, are the kinds of questions I'll ask as president, given my experience. I also think, too, that another place that you see best practices, which I know MTA is certainly implementing, perhaps we can accelerate it, is asset management and enterprise asset management. Sounds boring, apologies, but I think this is the kind of crux of the system that I'll be interested in, which is where do we need to be focused on our power systems? Where do we need to be focused on our track, signal, et cetera? So I think the big issues that we've talked about we'll be focused on, but at the same time really rolling up our sleeves in the nitty-gritty of a system is what I'll bring. By the way, I think I need to lose weight because the seat has sunk. It is not the weight of the job that has done this. I think it's just the seat, so sorry about that.
We're going to get haircuts.
I'm sorry, I'm just...
They look like barber chairs.
I do need a haircut.
Myers here.
I will take that advice. If anyone has a good barber in the city, please let me know.
We're going to move on to Arthur Chen of Fox 5, who is in straight ahead center with his hand up right there. Thank you.
Hi, gentlemen. I have a question for each of you, beginning with the chairman. You talked about the safety results you're anecdotally seeing downtown, down below. Can you talk also about the specific problem of homelessness? is a systems method. Do you feel like that is also improving things down there? Is there any data that supports that? And then,
Okay, good. Might be the way.
welcome back. And two-part question for you, sir. One is, how the MTA has been funded has traditionally been a very tricky formula to manage, and I know a lot of the responsibility goes to your right, but since you have experience in other systems, is there something that's done in some of these other systems that we haven't looked at as a way to fund mass transit where we're not in a pinch all the time? And then the other question is, a lot has been made that you are not a car owner. I wonder if that has any impact on how you see not just what falls under your purview, but also transportation in the city.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so on the first point, at least our mantra in Massachusetts was both reform and revenue. And what that means is, at least then, 10 years ago, is we needed to invest in the system that we wanted, never mind what we deserved. I think that's probably true here, is that the riders deserve a better system and want a better system. And so it's incumbent upon us in transit to be efficient, to see if there are better ways to do business. But at the same time, I'm also pretty convinced, having just spent a few days here, that there's got to have to be investment if it's the kind of service that New Yorkers want and deserve. At least that was the case in Massachusetts. I would say this, that's not unique to New York or Boston. I think that's the story of transit in the United States, is that you need to be both efficient, but I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that you need to invest in this service. I would finally say this, this moment in history, if we're really going to be serious about climate change, then investing in transit is going to be a big part of the story of how that's defeated. So I hope, I can be part of a voice, in that call for both better service, but also better investment. My car ownership, so I haven't owned a car since 2010. And I mean, look, I rely on public transit in my home. I will certainly rely on it here in New York. You'll probably see me out on the subway on the weekends too. I told someone I generally don't have a life, so I expect to be out and about, talking to folks and seeing how we're performing, as I did in Boston. But I mean, look, I think, I also understand though that I'm privileged, and there are a lot of folks who, I have choices, and there are a lot of folks in this city and other cities who do not. They rely on public transportation in a way that I don't, even though I don't own a car. And so, whether it's better bus service or some of the equity issues that are occurring, we need to have that front and center.
So to your question about safety, look, it's way too early to start declaring victory. What I'm sharing is, I think, some important anecdotes that show that the changes that have been made are already starting to have effect. That we're catching, we're interdicting bad guys who enter the system with weapons on them at the fare gates. That's an important change that the police department has set in motion. There are cops on the platform who are able to respond quickly, and when there are bad things going on, that is a change. We're already seeing, another anecdotal area is shopping carts, which are a source of danger. We had a train operator who died because a shopping cart was set on fire. There are fewer shopping carts in the system. That we track that one closely because of its safety implications. So while it's way too early to say that the homelessness issue and the bigger issues of crime have been changed, we all have to wait and see what the stats are every month and react to those. But I do think that there's an important sign for the customers that the strategy, the safety actions that the city has set in motion with the governor's support are taking effect.
And straight down the center, you have Lauren Glassberg from Channel 7 Eyewitness News. Lauren.
Thanks, Tim. Mr. Davey, in the last couple of days that you've been riding the train back in New York City, what is your sense of anxiety? I think a lot of people stand back on the platforms, they stand above on the stairs, they wait for the train to come in. How did you approach riding it? And how did you feel? And would you ride in the middle of the night?
Yeah, so a lot of questions to unpack. I mean, I didn't feel a great sense of anxiety, but that's, my perception. There are a lot of other folks who I understand and, do. And so I did observe riders, standing against walls, for example, or situating themselves near posts or other immovable objects to make sure that someone didn't approach them from behind, for example. There's obviously a practical, I think, element that folks are concerned about. I also did see, homeless folks sleeping on, platforms. I did see a fare evader. Couldn't catch him, but probably not empowered to yet, or maybe I'll never be empowered to. But You know, there's those kinds of issues that we need to address. That said, I saw a lot of good in this system, a lot of good. A lot of folks on the system, families, folks purely commuting, tourists, you know, enjoying the cultural amenities here, cops, a lot of employees, a lot of cleaners. And so I think there's a lot of good we can build upon for sure. But as I said before, perception is reality. We need to squarely address front and center the safety issues so folks feel, you know, feel safe. Look, 5 million people rode the subway, or entire system, I should say, yesterday, right, thereabouts. So it's not as if riders have abandoned us, but we do have a lot of work to do. And you know, and we're committed to that. And again, we know the political leadership, the mayor and the governor, who I've watched from afar, are very impressed that they are stepping up and really addressing this issue, because we can't do it alone.
And would you ride in the middle of the night?
I would, and I plan to.
All right, we're back on Zoom. In front of you, it's Kevin Duggan from AM New York. Kevin, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to do this, Richard. I wanted to ask you first about stroller policies on buses. I don't know if you've been following, it's come up in New York City recently.
I
know
have.
in the past, yeah, it's been quite a hot topic issue. I know, you know, transit have this working group going to look at it with also with disability rights advocates. You've in the past said in Boston that you have thought it was one of the dumbest ideas that you floated.
I think actually I said it was the dumbest idea floated, but that's okay.
Yeah, there you go. So, you know, how do you think the circle can be squared over in New York City? Do you think that's possible? What do you want to do on this issue? And then I have one more question on a separate topic.
Sure. No, I appreciate the question. You know, a couple of things. I think I would say if you've met one transit system, you've met one transit system, right? So there's unique contexts in all cities and places that need to be thought through. And in Boston, it was a bit of a different context. You know, at the same time, you know, we've heard from, I've both watched board meetings over the last few months and attended last week's, 2 weeks ago now, and you know, saw both disability advocates and you know, moms and caretakers addressing anxiety about both a potential change in the policy and the current policy. So, I mean, I don't have an answer yet, but I completely endorse what Craig and the transit team, Craig Cipriano, the transit team did, which is to pull together a working group of stakeholders to come back to us with recommendations. The only thing I would expect is to not wait months for those recommendations, but weeks. You know, I start on May 2nd, and I would ask that working group to come back to me within weeks, not months, with those recommendations.
Thanks for that. And then the second one is, you mentioned one of your big priorities is cleanliness. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. One of the things that has remained the same in the subway throughout the pandemic is the restrooms haven't reopened. Would you like to see them reopen in some way, even if it's maybe just like a couple of them for the start?
Yeah, well, let me address the cleanliness first. I mean, look, you know, again, I have observed, you know, over the last few days, some places that are quite clean. They tend to be obviously the newer stations, for example. Hudson Yards comes to mind. There are other places where we have high traffic or perhaps are older. I think there's probably some new methods we could consider. You'll probably see me picking up litter around the system too, as I have been the last couple of days, and I did in Boston. And so I think those are the kinds of basics that we should address. You know, look, in terms of the bathrooms, I haven't, you know, thought through that specifically, but what I would say is, you know, there are going to be challenges to that if those are reopened, right? So if we're trying to remove some of the social ills that are occurring, homelessness, crime, and yet you're reopening, you know, rooms that then can be closed, I have a lot of worry about that. So, you know, I think it's more complicated than just opening or closing a bathroom.
All right, just to your left there is David Colon from Streets Blog. Dave.
David, wow, we're really getting off on a new foot here. Hey, Richard, I got a couple for you. One is, I'm wondering, I spoke to somebody who worked with you in Boston.
Oh, God, what did
and
they say?
He actually was very nice. He had a lot of.
It was nice to you or nice to
about
me?
you. Nice to me, and said a lot of nice things about you. He said you were a big bus guy up there in Boston. So I was just wondering, what kind of things do you think you're going to try to do to improve bus service in the city? And do you think that there's you know, you run the buses, the mayor and the city council run the streets.
Yeah.
You know, what is your plan to kind of get around that kind of spark situation? And then I got one more after this.
Well, look, I have to give the city here a lot of credit, and the mayor and the commissioner in particular. I would say in Boston it was a little, at least when I was there, it was a little tougher to get focus with the city on whether it was, you know, signal prioritization or bus lanes. I think the success that Boston's had recently has been, you know, frankly, under new leadership, under new mayor and new governor. So, but I think here there's been a lot of good work that's done. I would want to build upon that, right? I also, too, am very interested to see how the Bronx redesign rollout in June goes, and we're going to watch very closely the feedback we get for the Queens redesign. Again, redesign is something that other cities are done. This is public knowledge, but I was one of the lead consultants helping Washington, D.C.'s bus transformation program. So, hope to bring some of those best practices and expertise here. But I think, we've got a lot of good to build on, and there's still a lot of ambition. I think the mayor made it a signature part of his campaign to continue to build out what had already been done, and we look forward to working with him and his team to do that.
And then the other one is you had your list of priorities. I think somebody noticed you didn't have frequency on there, increasing frequency. Is that going to be something that you want to work on? Do you think the MTA has to work on that in terms of subways and buses? And is that a funding issue? Is it a best practices work issue?
Yeah, no. So it's a great point. I would say, at least in my mind, I put frequency and reliability together, so perhaps I should have done that. But no, we absolutely have to look at that, right? So we know that there's a tipping point for ridership, at least in other systems, that if you're not running frequent service or reliable service or predictable service, then you'll lose some ridership shed for sure. So that's something we will definitely look at. The reality, of course, is we're still, as I understand it, several hundred, if not more, short of our operators, both on subway and bus. Because of COVID and hiring. And so, there's a reality of that. I think we hope to be at a full complement by the end of the second quarter. But so there's more work to do. But certainly improving frequency is going to be key.
And once again, straight back to the second level gallery, you're looking at Steve Burns of CBS 880 Radio here in New York.
Hey, Steve.
Thanks very much. Good to see you, Mr. Davey. Wanted to ask, kind of similar to what Dave's last question was on ridership trends. And we're seeing the new normal of maybe less emphasis on AM and PM peaks and ridership recovering faster during times like middays, overnights, weekends especially. Does that at all change the calculus for you in terms of operations? And we've seen, politicians here calling for more consistent service throughout the day, throughout the week, instead of just that concentration on AM and PM peaks. How do you look at that situation going forward, this new normal with work schedules?
Yeah, and I mean, the chair has talked about this publicly a few times, which is we might have to, at least in the short and medium term, adjust our schedule and adjust what we're putting out based on these new norms. I would say this, in my experience, transit systems, even around the world, haven't been nimble enough, I think, when it comes to responding to customers and what they're doing and what they need. And so that's a question I think, in transit we need to be looking at, which is being a bit more nimble. Now, there are picks with labor and other sort of issues I think we have to think through. But I think you're right. The kind of service that may emerge, and it's unclear, but may emerge, is perhaps less of a peak period on Mondays and Fridays, but more of a perhaps midday service or frontline worker service or even sort of cultural amenity service. So I think all those things we need to look at. In Boston, we used to pick, rush hour, non-rush hour, Saturday, and holiday. Like, those days are over, I think. We need to be more creative in how we schedule our service.
Oh, let's go to Michael Gold on Zoom from the New York Times. Michael, good afternoon.
Hey guys, thank you so much. I want to follow up on Steve's question and ask about weekends. We know from ridership trends that weekends came back way faster than weekdays, but the experiences of riders who are on the system on the weekends tend to be disrupted by construction, disrupted by rerouting, disrupted by delays. I'm curious how you would address that, especially as we see from the MTA's own data that people are choosing to use the system when it comes to leisure, even if they're not taking it to work, but at the same time, it's such a subpar experience for a lot of people when they're on the trains on Saturdays and Sundays.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Michael, and so it also then goes to this point of being responsive to our riders on the flip side, which is our construction schedule. So I think in that one would work closely with Jamie and his team at Design and Construction to ensure that, again, based on information and our data, are there different ways to accomplish some of the construction projects that need to occur without slowing them down, right? There's always this healthy tension between providing service for our customers, but also ensuring that the issues I talked about before, those reliability issues, if you don't address them, power, signal, track, you're trading one challenge for the next. So I think it's going to be a balancing act for us, but I think your point is well taken, which is it's safe to assume that we shouldn't always be thinking that doing work on nights, but particularly weekends, is always the right call as it was in the past.
All right, thanks, Michael. Then we're going to go to your right here, James Ford with Pix 11 standing by. James.
Thank you. It's good to meet you. If I could follow up a bit on Dave's from Street Blog's line of questioning, just can you talk a little more about buses?
Sure.
You have talked about how you intend to be riding the rails. How much riding? I mean, it's an extensive system.
Indeed.
How much riding do you anticipate doing on the buses? What are your expectations there? And how do you ensure that, what can you do most to get numbers back up?
Sure.
On the roads as well as the rails?
Yeah, no, I mean, so I appreciate the question. So I will be on, both modes. And by the way, why I obviously, not obviously, I'm not a paratransit user. That's also squarely on my mind as well. I think there are improvements we can make there. That said, no, I definitely expect to be on our bus network as well. I spent some time yesterday at the bus depot on 46th and 42nd, and 11th. Quill, exactly. And had a chance to, look at some of the electric buses that we're implementing, which is great. Talk to some employees as well. Frankly, see the security barrier that's been put up to protect our employees from assault. Just really sort of understanding some of the issues and challenges that we have on the bus side. But look, I'm excited about bus. I mean, look, between the redesign that's going to occur in June and the other one we're obviously having some public conversation about, and then working with a progressive city around the question of, how do we not only, improve bus speeds, but also camera enforcement. I mean, I think the data I've seen or heard from MTA is pretty astounding, where, if you're violating, one of the bus lanes, 80 or 85%, I think, of folks who do that are not a second time, are not a second time abuser because it gets their attention. So there are other systems, by the way, I know in Washington that they would be envious of that power to be able to do that. So I think leveraging some of the opportunities that New York has, I'm excited about. But yes, as mentioned, I took the bus frequently in Boston. I would expect to do the same here.
And now we're over here to Dan Rivoli of New York One Television News. Dan.
Sure.
What is one or a few, however many you want to name, what are your big ideas to tangibly improve service on the subway and the bus? And I have a second question to follow.
Sure. That's a big question. So acknowledging, if you will, that I'm not on the job yet and been here a few days. I would say a few things. I mean, look, there's some things to build upon already that's happening, right? So like the bus redesign. That doesn't sound sexy, but it's responding to new ridership patterns, or where folks are living and working today when the bus routes were redesigned probably decades ago. Again, not new. Other systems are doing that, but you've seen in places like, again, pre-pandemic, you've seen in places like Washington and Houston, Los Angeles, where that's really paid some dividends. I think that's one. I had the opportunity 5 years ago to be part of the Subway Action Plan, and I think it's good old-fashioned rolling up your sleeves and improving speed restrictions and looking at power issues. I had a chance to visit the Power Control Center yesterday, which is behind the Rail Control Center. I mean, honestly, it looked like something out of the 1960s. That we're going to have. It's working, but it has to be updated. So I think it's a lot of just letting folks know that this is a good system. We clearly need to address the safety issues, but we need to continue to invest. Obviously, Geno, in his previous role and now, I mean, there's been historic investment in this system, which is exciting, but we can't rest in those laurels. I know he's not, but we need to continue to push because there's so much that needs to be done.
All right, let me rephrase. Was there anything you did in Boston that was unique, that improved subway or bus service that you think you can bring to New York? And I'll just give an example.
Sure.
Your predecessor literally sped up the speed of trains, and people felt it. What do you, a policy, a change, anything new that you want to bring to New York that works in Boston or anywhere else you've studied?
Yeah, I mean, so look, it's again, rolling up your sleeves, whether it's the speed restrictions or improving signal reliability. We have new cars that are coming online, for example. So whether it's 3 or 4 door boarding, for example, on our subway network, working with the city hand in glove, improving speeds and having transit signal. I don't think, I mean, honestly, there's probably some new ideas, but candidly, again, having spent just a few days here, I think it's taking the ideas that exist and accelerating the heck out of them so that they're making a difference today.
Okay, and then just a follow-up, you've been riding the subway and buses. How would you characterize the service you were getting when you were a passenger, And what did you want to change about that, whether it's the time between the next train, the speed of it, were you stuck in a tunnel wondering why aren't we moving? Can you paint for New Yorkers what your experience was like when you were here?
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's talk about a few positives. I think the Omni card is probably one of the more progressive fare collection systems in the United States, if not the world. I can't tell you how many folks reached out to me after taking this job was announced. They said they had their Metro card, and I said, well, look, at least in most of the subway system, you don't need it anymore, right? We've got this Omni system that we're using. I think that's one. Look, a couple other things. Cleanliness in some places that I saw was quite good. I think it was uneven in others. The end-of-line cleaning that I saw this morning, for example, was excellent, and I told the staff that for sure. I like the progressiveness around electric buses and the bus redesign. We're probably not always going to get it right with the public, but that's key, is the process and engagement with folks, so we get it almost right or pretty right in their view. I think some of the customer communication is great. I think we can improve upon that. I know operators were making announcements in a few of the subway cars that I was on. I couldn't hear them, and I don't think it's their fault. I think it's probably the dated technology, and so I think that's something I'd want to dig into for sure. And as I mentioned, I mean, the safety and some of the challenges that have manifested themselves in our stations and our platforms. I mean, I truly believe that transit is as much the public square today as anywhere else, and whatever's happening in society and the world is going to spill onto our platforms, and we need to address it in a way that is mindful that our fellow New Yorkers, or some are down their luck and have issues, and we need to help them, and others are bad actors, and they need to be addressed.
Over to your far left in the box seats by the Riverview wing is David Meyer of the New York Post. David.
Rich, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
Thanks
you.
for coming to New York.
Sure.
2 questions. First, it sounds like you've gotten a wide breadth of our system. I wonder if you can tell us more about the logic and goals of your tour, where you've been, and we've been talking a lot about buses, specifically what bus routes you've ridden. It sounds like you've been to some depots. What are the goals? You haven't even started yet. So, what are the goals for the next month in terms of going around New York and getting a breadth and sense of the breadth of the system?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the breadth of the system is almost daunting in some ways, right? I mean, thousands and thousands of bus stops, 472 subway stations. I mean, and again, I don't think we've frankly today talked enough about paratransit too, which I'm also very interested in understanding more and seeing where we can make improvements. I think it's going to take me. It's going to take me more than a month to probably get up to speed about every nook and cranny of the system, but I'm completely dedicating to doing that. For me in the next month, it's a few things. One is, probably now taking a step back and really putting to paper, some thoughts about where we can make some improvements, reading some more of the board reports, again, listening to staff, being out there, both, management here and to Broadway and across the system, talking to external stakeholders, right? I mean, talking to business leaders, talking to labor leaders, talking to customer advocates, and understanding what they see as the big issues. I think it's a lot of listening for me, even if I were from New York, and even if I, hadn't spent a lot of time here. This is a job that requires a lot more listening than it does talking, which makes today a bit unusual, I hope, for me. I hope to do a lot more listening.
And another question, not a follow-up. I'm wondering, obviously you've spoken with Craig, but I'm wondering if you've spoken with either of your other 2 immediate predecessors, Sarah Feinberg and Andy Byford, and if so, what lessons or things they impart on you?
Yeah, no, so I have had a chance to talk to Sarah. I think, I obviously don't want to speak for her, but it's a job like me at the T. I mean, running the T was the best job I've ever had in my life. I expect to exceed that in a month. I think for her it was the same, and so getting advice on where to focus and some of the challenges that she saw. I would say, I have appreciated the outpouring of sort of support and folks who both have worked here and those who are, riders or friends in New York who have given me a lot of advice, which I need. Suffice to say, I think what I have felt is people are rooting for us to succeed, and I hope to capture that and succeed.
So you haven't spoken to Byford?
I have not. I have not.
All right, just closing us out on your first lap around the New York press corps. Down to your left, it's Michelle Caskey of Bloomberg News. Michelle.
Hey, Rich. Welcome.
Thank you.
And or welcome back, I should say, to New York City. And you mentioned early about with improving ridership, it involves, focus on safety and cleanliness, reliability. But, those initiatives, were already ramped up before you were picked to come here. So what specific ideas will you be bringing to help improve ridership on subways?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there's a good plan in place, for example, on safety. It's now working that plan. It's not going to probably take just a couple of weeks to address some of the safety issues. And so making sure that, we're supporting, NYPD, homeless outreach, and others in that regard. I think that's probably going to take some time. So I think, those specifics are there. We need to support that. I think on reliability, as I mentioned, I'm interested in digging more into the details of power and signal and track. Again, the stuff that's not sexy, there won't be ribbon cuttings to. But at least in my experience in Boston and looking at other transit systems around the world, tend to be where the rubber meets the road, if you will, and where the issues are. And so focusing on that, where have perhaps we, not done some work because we've had lower headcount, for example, or where because of COVID we've had to defer some maintenance, as an example. Again, I don't know that that is true or not, but these are the questions I'll be asking for sure. And as I said, back to the basics on cleanliness. There will be other things I expect that we'll be working on, whether it's new technologies or, as I said, thinking about paratransit and improving the service there, for example. But I need to, over the next few weeks and probably into May, really begin to continue to listen and get the details.
And just a quick second question is, do you know yet what neighborhood you'll be living in? What is your commute looking like? Or will you be close enough where you can just walk?
So I think it'll be very likely my wife and I will be in a subway or bus line, probably a subway line. For all of you married, everything is a negotiation in life. So she will be working here in New York too. So to Broadway will be important, but so will her place. But very likely in Manhattan. We will, of course, we don't own a car. We're not buying a car. I think that would be actually the dumbest thing I would ever do. Forget about the stroller policy. Buy a car here in New York. So, but no, I'm excited to take the system every day to see what customers are facing. So, and I won't tell the staff in advance which lines I'm taking either.
All right, Richard. Thank you. Thanks, Jano. Thanks to everybody for. Wait, Clayton is pointing. Is that what happened? Who do we? Oh, my goodness. My apologies. The great, legendary Jose Martinez, proprietor of the Don Pepe Deli, and America's favorite station, Penn Station, is right here with the city, sir.
Excellent.
I'll have to invite you, sir, to the legendary Don Pepe Deli.
I believe you just did. I know you have to invite me. Hello.
Given the many challenges you're facing here, financial, regaining rider trust, societal problems, the issues of crime, and where you're coming from, what made this job so appealing, in addition to the somewhat short-lived nature of the job that it has been, say, over the last decade or so? And thank you. Welcome to New York.
Thank you. No, so welcome to New York. Thank you. Well, I look forward to breaking bread with you. So look, a couple things. I mean, you've seen my background and whatever, my experience, public sector, public service, and public transportation more acutely are in my blood. I mean, I took public transit to high school in Boston, both subway and bus. So it's been in my blood. I won't tell you how old I am, but for that period of time, and the opportunity to come and work in New York City Transit, you might say it is a dream job for someone who loves public service and loves public transportation. That's one. Two, I've known the gentleman to my right for a long time, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. And so having Jano as my boss was very appealing to me. And lastly, look, I've watched near and far on the political leadership, and the mayor and the governor are serious about addressing not only the short-term safety and security issues, but the long-term issues of improving transit in New York City. And to have that kind of alignment is unique. And I had that in Boston. I was very fortunate to work for a governor who cared deeply about public transportation, Deval Patrick, and working with two mayors, Tom Menino, who's passed, and now Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh, who's a friend. You don't often get that in these kinds of jobs. And so, yeah, there are a lot of challenges, but to have, I think, the leadership that we have and the attention that we have, and look, at the end of the day, people don't want us to fail. They want us to succeed, because if we're failing, New York's failing. So yeah, it's a big task, but there's a lot of people who are rooting for us. So that's what makes this job, I think, among the best in the world, not in America, in the world, to be. And again, I said I hope whenever my tenure ends, hopefully it's not in two years. Hopefully I'll break some records. But that folks can look back and say, that guy from Boston made a difference.
And just in the New York tradition of not wanting the experience to end,
please.
Steve Nesson has
Steve, please.
a question right here from WNYC and the Gothamist.
Cool.
Hey there. Welcome.
Thank you.
Just one last final question.
Really?
If you're sticking around, at least through the summer,
yes.
The MTA should be releasing some more information about its congestion pricing program.
Yes.
There's going to be a lot of recalcitrant lawmakers and residents that will not want to pay this charge or will fight about it. How are you going to balance? How are you going to sell, what is likely to be a very unpopular program with a lot of people that you have to work with, like lawmakers?
Let me take that out of my hat.
First of all,
this is leadership. I'm delegating up, right?
Yeah. That Rich didn't sign up to be in charge of the congestion pricing implementation. But look, we're actually on, I think, a pretty solid path. The legislature enacted a law that said congestion pricing will happen. We are now pretty far along and on schedule in doing all the analysis and all the public outreach that will allow us to get a federal NEPA approval, the final step in the federal environmental review process. And we're on schedule in moving forward. Now, obviously, when we're talking about pricing, there's going to be public discussion and debate and maybe some drama. But the most important thing is, one, it's the law of the state of New York, and two, we're doing everything that was planned and necessary to execute it. Those are the things that will, I think, give us a high probability of success.
All right, thanks everybody. Jose's got the table held at the Don Pepe for those who are hungry. Thanks. And we'll see you next time at 2 Broadway. Thanks.